Hello, I'm Toby. I like Doctor Who, and I'm about to watch a story chosen for me by a friend with the aim of mining it for positives in order to guess what their favourite things about this particular adventure are. So join me, watch along with me if you like, or just listen as I chat to you, offer facts, opinions and observations, but mainly try to get us to those special planes that Doctor Who takes us to, those happy times and places. You're listening to Happy Times and Places, a positive Doctor Who episode commentary with me, Toby Hadoke. So it's time for episode 4, but before that, a quick recap to remind us who has chosen this particular adventure and why.
Hello, my name's Chris Boyle and I'm a full-time A-level law teacher and an incredibly part-time comedian and podcaster. The story that I've chosen is The Day of the Daleks, and the reason I've chosen that is because I do have problems with the Third Doctor. He should be my favourite. He's played by Jon Pertwee, he wears velvet jackets, he does incredibly complicated fight sequences whilst holding a glass of whiskey, and yet more often than not I find him a bit pompous and a bit superior, and it gets on my nerves. So I'm going to see if I can find the positives in a Third Doctor story.
Well, good evening, and let's go back to the day of the Daleks, episode 4. Press play in 3, 2, 1. Now. Welcome back. It's the final episode of Day of the Daleks. Those of you who are watching these episodes in chronological order, which is how I advise that you do, I mentioned my friend Mark Patterson, I think, in episode 2, helping with the tracing of Louis Marks, who wrote this story. Then didn't hear from Mark, apart from obviously we're Facebook friends, so you sort of think, oh, I know that person. When did you last speak to them? A million years ago. Mark dropped me a line. That's a great opening with the blur coming into focus. That's a glorious way to open the episode. Now I don't. Do they have the zoo? No, they don't, because if they'd had the whole of the bit of the last episode, we'd have seen the beginning of the title sequence. So actually, the cliffhanger sting coming in, which is unusual, is actually only in 2 reprises. What? Yeah, so it's only a 2-episode thing. And as I said, I do like an unusual way of doing the titles. That's why I love season 7 and the ones on the ambassadors of death. I always like it if they mess about a bit with how the titles and cliffhangers and things like that are done. I don't mind sort of messing with the format in that way. That's why the 60s is sometimes interesting, and season 7. Anyway, Mark, my friend, I heard from relatively recently, because he'd got, and it was a video message from his sons. I mean, Mark and I were mates at university, so the fact that he's got sons who are capable of walking and talking and doing things, and they sent me some questions about Doctor Who because they are Doctor Who fans. And I said my friend was called Mark Patterson, and you may, if you're watching the video version of this, see the name Dylan Patterson in the credits, because Dylan, Mark's son, having spoken to me, then sought out my show, Moths Ate My Doctor Who scarf, and had a listen, and was so inspired that he did a little design for me with my name on it. And I said, well, actually, can we change that and use it for the different iterations of these podcasts and videocasts? So the graphic design, the titles, the title card is done thanks to a young man who was inspired by Doctor Who, whose dad put him in touch with me because he had some questions. And so he then, used what he does well, which is his artistic skill, to to express himself as I did through comedy. He's done through art. So I thought that was a very appropriate thing to do, was to use his graphic design. So hire him. He's very young. But what a lovely thing, eh? I love the controller's journey. And Aubrey Woods does it well, because he's the bad guy, but even though he's done some terrible things, threatening the manager and sort of tricking Joe, you still buy the fact that even though he's quite a theatrical baddie, he actually, there's a humanity there, and you think he's doing the right thing. A Quisling, Pertwee, and the controller's position is understandable as far as he is concerned. He is right. Although, of course, you know, he convinces himself that he's right, but he's the one who gets fruit and a nice chair and the nice clothes and the whatever it is that makes your face shiny that other people don't get. So, there's interesting dynamics there. That he is decent. We do like him. We're supposed to sympathise with the journey that he takes. But he took that journey after living a life of largesse and threatening people below him, and doubtless ordering the deaths and imprisonment of people. But he's going, but I've got to survive. And take my yoga lessons so I can sit like a controller. And I used this story. I remember my uncle is my uncle's the uncle from London, and he's the sort of, he was once in a lift with Tom Baker. It was like, wow, that's amazing. And my uncle has always been a bit disparaging of Doctor Who until it came back. But he's a real film buff, my uncle. And he's edited stuff as well. He's an editor. He's a film editor. But we're not a showbiz family. He's my cool uncle. We're from the countryside. We have muddy boots and drafts and no conduit to show business. But my uncle is a bit of a maverick film editor, but you thought he'd love Doctor Who, but no, he think it's rubbish. And I remember saying, good science fiction, you should like The Terminator. That's a great film. And I remember going, but The Terminator stole an idea from Doctor Who. So if you like The Terminator, you've got to like Doctor Who. Oh, this is... so Scott Fredericks obviously doesn't die on film very clearly, because you see him jump there and get blown up. And these extras get killed as well. I think they've got names in the book. Are they Mark, Jacob and Zando? I haven't read that book for 35 years. They're somewhere in the back of my head there. And there's Boaz dead, and what looks like lots of sort of bloody bandages. So he gets quite a horrible death. But obviously they got the film back and went, it's really not clear that that's Boaz and Scott Fredericks. So then you have a sudden cut to him halfway through that film sequence on videotape of him against a black drape going, look out, Anat! So that you know that the person that gets blown up is him. And there's a bit like that in a Blake 7 episode. Is it the second episode of Blake 7 with Brian Blessed? I think Pamela Salem also gets killed in a sudden, awkward videotape cutaway in an otherwise filmic sequence because it had not been done clear enough. And I think I think Tony Cornter gets a very unclear death in Colony in Space, because his death is on film, and if they didn't get the requisite close up or whatever. But so they went to make that scene clearer, and I think in a special edition they filmize that shot so it fits in slightly better, because film and videotape do jar. If you're made like us, my mother wouldn't have noticed the difference. She could never tell the difference between film and videotape. If you said, look, this is a different sort of grain to the stuff that's inside, she go, I haven't got a clue what you're talking about. But she doesn't get why Alan Partridge is funny, because she finds it too awkward. We Doctor Who fans or old telly fans, I think sometimes we speak a visual language that others do not, and sometimes we see things as convincing where everybody else thinks things look awful. So sometimes it works to our advantage and sometimes not. And that meant I talked a lot through the scene with the controller where they say, they would always have found somebody else, which is very true. And that doesn't let the controller off the hook, but it shows the controller being shown mercy, and it also says to him, you're not special, mate. And anybody would have, there was always going to be somebody that would sell people out. May as well have been you. So it doesn't let him off the hook, but it does make him ultimately do the right thing. And I think that's really interesting, and that's a nice journey. I'm sure it's Mark, Jacob, and Zando, because in the book, characters get more to do. In fact, Monia, he gets the opening of the book. But yeah, so, and it's quite good that to give extras, as they are in here, they're just, they were in that sequence, who just get killed. But if you suddenly introduce characters and they've got names, you go, I'll get to that. Oh no, Mark, Jacob, and Zando have just become. Do they all get killed? I think they do. But yeah, they're, when you've got a book, if you can give, if you could give even just a name to a character that is otherwise just sort of, visual fodder. He's got a chain around his neck. He's got a medallion around his neck as, well, you can't see if it's a medallion, but he's got a chain as Monia, Valentine Palmer, who was I think something of a big deal as an actor in the 70s, but he told me he got bored quite easily, so he did a bit of acting and he did quite well, and then he's very beautiful, isn't he? And then went and did something else. He's got a good face. But I had a nice time with him when after he offered his services to be interviewed. He directed a film as well. Now sure, has had an episode off, hasn't he? Jimmy Winston, and he's going to go and do that great Doctor Who thing of sacrificing yourself. So he's essentially done what... Well, they've all essentially done what the Michael Biehn character does in The Terminator. But I think there's an Outer Limits episode as well, isn't there? So it's not an unusual science fiction trope, but it was enough for me to claim that Doctor Who was just as good as the films my uncle liked. Because what my uncle liked about the films was that they were films, and they are filmic. And films can do things that you can't do in a television studio. But I wasn't having that as a furious youngster who wanted everybody to like Doctor Who and was angry if people didn't like Doctor Who. But I think now we've passed through that embarrassment phase with old television, or perhaps I just don't care what other people think. But I'm less conscious of the sort of boring, the set's wobbled, or it's flat, that is trotted out again, often, as I alluded to last episode, by people that are paid for a living to know and write about television. Anyway, we are here to... Well, I am accentuating the positive. I'm just being negative about the people who don't accentuate the positive. And that's therefore a negative about a negative, which in itself is a positive. Like a cobweb. The lighting in this this cellar I've mentioned before, and it really does work. And yes, suicide, self-sacrifice is quite a thing that runs through Doctor Who. It's an act of bravery, isn't it, to give your life to save others. And have they done this is where they do the reveal, isn't it? And what a great twist is that? You've got these soldiers from the future who've come to kill. They're Terminators, basically. They've come to do a benign version of what the Terminator does in the Terminator. They've come to kill what they think is a bad guy in order to stop the bad future happening. Whereas the Terminator travels back to kill Sarah Connor to ensure that the baddies prosper. So the goodies, they're the goodies, sure, but they've just realised that they are the architects of their own destruction. And at least he has the courtesy to call it what does he call it? A temporal paradox? temporal paradox, which just says, so we can do that. Oh, and this has, of course, got the famous story about the Blinovitch limitation effect, hasn't it? Saying that you can't do something again. Why not? Because of the limitation effect. What's that? Oh no, I've been interrupted before I have to give the explanation, which I think Barry Letts or Terence Dicks used as a kind of example of how you could be cheeky, but you would still raise the spectre of why time travel didn't let you do things, more over and over and over again, which actually in the timey-wimey era of the show you could. I think that causes problems for storytelling. I think you can't get too clever with what Doctor Who does with time travel, because then you can use it to conveniently get you out of trouble. Whereas this, the whole point of the story is that is the paradox, which is a nice big shocker, but they can't solve it by keep going to try and go back and change it and change it and change it until they get what they want, which I think is dramatically a bit feeble. So I think you're allowed it in this, because that paradox is allowed to be the sort of plot twist, but they then don't get sort of consumed by the whole time travel thing and make it make time travel the method with which they solve the time travel paradox, apart from just stopping the act. But the Doctor uses that through persuading Shura and the human interaction, and they have to get back via the controller. So it's more about the people and the dynamics, which is more interesting than sort of silly time travel games in a way. So I think they pitch the time travel right, because Doctor Who doesn't do time travel that often, does it? Time travel gets you to the story and it gets you away from the story, but then you can't ask too many questions about it. And I think you endanger your credibility, because the layman, the person on the street, has always said, when you say about Doctor Who, well, why don't they just travel back in time and stop that happening when something goes wrong? You go, well, you can't. And in Doctor Who at this point, you generally can't. This is the natural conclusion of the controller's journey, and Aubrey Woods does it really well. And it is an interesting performance, because he does do all that theatrical stuff, but he's not like the sort of waxy Dalek ladies. Is that he there is a humanity to him there that is concurrent with this rather avant-garde approach to physicality and vocal delivery, but it works, and it's actually quite touching in places, even though he's got a shiny silver face. And Senior Guard gets a bit of a moment where he gets to do slightly more than guards tend to do in Doctor Who. He gets a bit of a duplicitous character arc, where his sadism and his enjoyment of what he does kind of pays off. It's a nice little unpleasant arc. Although, of course, by within 5 or 10 minutes, he will never have existed to be such a beast. But that's well done. It's you get your parting shot, controller, and Andrew Carr, who I think was also an artist, gets a nice little bit in that good costume. And I think he gets a nice, in this world, it's quite although, we know this world gets, look how far he goes. Look how far he exits, because of the clever depth of field that we've got, because of the way that the sets are positioned. Alex McIntosh at Orderly House. Alex McIntosh, I love the fact that he gets a caption, because this is what we're seeing is also the news report. But Alex McIntosh was a news reporter. So he is one of that rare bevy of people playing themselves, although he's not credited as himself, Alex McIntosh. He's credited as TV presenter, but he was a TV presenter. So that's a nice bit of, I'm going to say verisimilitude. So if you're playing the verisimilitude drinking game. And of course, do we see Miss Paget? Because Jean McFarlane, who plays Miss Paget, is, and that's that extra that we just saw opening the door is Glenn Witter, who was in On the Buses. But he's just an extra in this, and I think he'd been one of the Egyptian slaves in Daleks Master Plan. But this person holding the briefcase, who's an extra called Desmond Verini, should be Jean McFarlane, Miss Paget, who we saw in episode 1, who I don't know an awful lot about, but I did find something about her as I think she was a model. She was quite tall back in the day, but I think she's no longer with us. But she fell ill during this, so couldn't make the recording for this episode. So although she's credited, and I think she does appear on film, she doesn't take her place in the studio. So Miss Paget vanishes, even though she's credited on this. That's an iconic. There's photos of the Daleks and the Ogron coming out the tunnel. It's a really nicely chosen piece of location, that, actually, because you can disappear into the inky blackness on film and then reappear on videotape without too much of a jar. And that's quite good, because we're suggesting quite a lot of Daleks and Ogrons coming here, and that sort of works. It works less well in the final shootout when because one of the Daleks is a different colour, it's kind of obvious there are 3 Daleks. Everybody does hold their hands quite high aloft when they get killed by the Daleks in this story, and in sort of weird slow motion. Doesn't the Brigadier yell at Styles here, which I rather like. I like it when the Brigadier sort of puts his foot down but remains terribly polite. And doesn't he go, "Get out of this house, sir, you twat"? He does that in a bit, I think. Yes, and I'm sure there's a bit in the book where Shura, who's young and in real pain and stuff, I think, doesn't he hug the bomb, and it says it, and Shura had a feeling of, not satisfaction but comfort. He's comforted. That's the shot of John Levine that I think is a lovely shot of him. There's a photo of him with him and the radio doing that, and it's a really good pick of Benton. "Now be quiet, sir. I love the Nicholas Courtney pitches everything brilliantly. He's such a charming actor, and so Desmond Verini must have phoned home and gone, "I've got a line. Jean McFarlane's ill. They've given me a line." He must have been delighted. And this is always talked of, this climax, as being slightly disappointing because it's obvious that there are 3 Daleks. But at the moment, as I'm watching it, lots of soldiers, explosions. This is what I want from the Unit era. And I remember this is done very well in the special edition that was a passion project for Steve Broster, and he really went to town on it. And I think it's a really good example of what you can do with the DVD range. Although I am watching the episodes as broadcast, and actually this is great. There's loads of Ogres. There's Jean McFarlane. She is tall, isn't she? She's still credited and still in the episode, but she should have been indoors as well. But of course, that was done at a completely different time. I think they got into trouble from the car company because they put decals on the cars, and it damaged the cars. This battle is not... I do think the Gold Dalek doesn't help, but I don't think it's as limited as perhaps I was expecting. But I have charged myself with being positive, and I was sort of in mind to anticipate the things that didn't quite work, and I think that worked all okay. Yeah, so he's doing it. I mean, it is an act of self-sacrifice, but actually he's wiped out the future that he comes from anyway. But I still think it's brave. Yeah, and I'm sure he hugs the bomb in the book. I remember that being quite... it was quite strange. Well, no, it worked for me, that. It was interesting that I understood that you could be doing a terrible thing and throwing your life away, but it suddenly everything sort of made sense to him. I don't think I've imagined this, but as I say, it's at least 35 years since I read that book, I should think. The Target books were a great part of your development of being a Doctor Who fan if you're from my generation. Yeah, you tell him. And hats off to Jimmy Winston, and R.I.P. sir. And of course, this episode ends quite abruptly because you're supposed to actually then go back to Unit HQ and have the scene that we had in episode 1, but instead you have this sort of, I mean, it's not downbeat. It's not downbeat, is it? But it's sort of quite on the nose, and you know, the fact that the Doctor Who universe was, you know, on the verge of World War III or whatever, I think is quite hard stuff when you're a kid, and especially, you know, with the iconography of World War II and dramas and comic strips and films about World War II were still pretty prevalent, although they'd happened before my lifetime. You know, my mother was born during the Second World War, but, you know, grandparents fought in it. It was terrible times, and the idea that there could be another one was absolutely terrifying, and, you know, but not entirely out of the question. So to sort of not dangle the carrot, because that suggests we'd want it, but the shadow of that, the sword of the Damocles hanging, was you know, felt grown up and felt pretty scary. So I think the idea of ending on that sort of warning of going, yeah, we've seen what happens if you don't do it, and the idea that you know, that politician's gotta get it right, otherwise, you know, that terrible dystopian future will happen. You know, flies in the face of that idea we have about the coziness of the Unit family and the Unit era, which I think we would feel that sort of coziness if we had the sort of witty return to the scene from episode 1. Although it does mean that scene from episode 1 is slightly redundant and doesn't quite make sense without the payoff. It is in the book. Read the book. Go and read the book. But before that, we need to see what Chris Boyle has liked about episode 4 and overall. And so what am I going to go for episode 4 and for overall? Well, I think overall, because I haven't mentioned it yet, is you know, that bit where Andrew Carr, the chief guard, walks off right into the distance. There's loads of shots like that where, because of the nature of the set, our perspective is played with. So it's more than the set design. It's the depth of the shot, the depth of field, the proportions of the doors to the people, the way that people are framed within doors or disappear right into the back of set. I think that we could even call it art direction. Could we? No, I don't know. Whatever that is, I'm definitely going for. Is that an overall thing, or is that? Yeah, I think that's an overall thing, and also, well, maybe what I've just talked about towards the end there, the fact that Earth is on the verge of World War III. I think that's a riposte to the oft mooted idea that the Pertwee era is a little cosy. That's very edgy and obviously done, you know, in the manner of a child-friendly television program. That still felt pretty gutsy to me, and felt that's why I didn't even talk much about the Dalek voices. Peter Messeline, who was Canadian. I don't know much about Oliver Gilbert, but Peter Messeline only died a couple of years ago. My friend Mike in Canada got me his autograph, but I still haven't received it. So it's somewhere there. Anyway, it's the enemies. It's the too many syllables that doesn't quite work. Anyway, that doesn't matter. We are accentuating the positive. So World War III and the proportion and depth of the sets and the shooting of them, they're my two things, my episode 4 thing, and my bonus thing. What has my friend Chris chosen?
Episode 4 of Day of the Daleks, and I've gone with the revelation that the gorillas were the cause of the future that they were trying to prevent all along. I just think it was incredibly kind of Moffat era. It's so timey-wimey, and it's a bit of a rug pull that even Christopher Nolan will be proud of. So yeah, that's my favourite thing about episode 4.
And the bonus thing?
For my bonus choice, I've gone with the Ogrons. They are basically an army of Bernard Breslau's crossed with Oddbod from Carry On Screaming, with a tiny sprinkling of Planet of the Apes. Has there ever been a slower moving armed force in the universe? They basically fire their guns while stood stock still and just taking all fire. They are incredible. So my bonus choice is the Ogrons.
I can't believe I didn't choose the Ogrons. I'm still happy with the things I chose. I don't think because I nearly chose Alex McIntosh and the verisimilitude that he provided. So I'm glad I pulled back and I think went for something more substantial and interesting. I could have chosen either of Chris's things, and I didn't. The Ogrons I feel particularly missed out there because they are a terrific design and they look great. The costumes, Mary Husband's costumes, I think are very, very good. Anyway, so I could have chosen anyway. Really enjoyed that. Yeah, when I said something about using time travel being feeble, I wasn't suggesting that Stephen Moffat's use of time travel is feeble storytelling. I put that very badly. I'm very much like Stephen Moffat's writing, but I think I was trying to allude to the fact that I thought this didn't get too carried away in using time travel to get out of the problem caused by time travel. It doesn't matter. Anyway, if I part of me wishes I could go back in time and change what I said, but in a way we know that can cause all sorts of problems, so let's not. But if you can interpret what I say with the generosity with which I try to express myself and sometimes fail, but the generosity of spirit I try to exude, then we're going to do this podcast fine, because this is all about trying to see the good and trying to enjoy the good and trying to watch Doctor Who with an open mind and an open heart and remind ourselves why we like it, particularly as I record this when we're in lockdown, where I go on social media and I see people being mean to each other and accentuating the negative because it's so easy to do, and there's something quite cathartic about that. I just hope here in this little corner of the internet that I'm carving here, that we can remind ourselves why we like Doctor Who, and try and escape from all of the difficult things that are flying around us at the moment in a world that seems to be full of schisms and people up against each other and people and divisiveness and all sorts of things that is the world I stepped out of to look at these cameras and speak into this microphone whilst Doctor Who was on. And I'm going to try and do that, even though I am a cynical, glass half empty, pessimistic sort of person. I'm fighting against my own nature to do this. So please help me. Send some feedback if you like. Send some positive vibes to my mailing list if you can on www.tobyhadoke.com. And let's just try and beat the dark, because we don't want the future to be awful, because frankly, I can't afford the silver makeup. I'll see you for whatever the next story is. Thanks for joining me for this one. It's the first one. If there's things you don't like about this, I'm hoping I'll iron out the kinks. Having just celebrated one of the small faces. And I'll hopefully see you at the next one. Thanks to Chris Boyle, who's a great guy. Do seek out his stuff. I'm I'm going to have a little bit at the end where he plugs his wares. So please avail yourself of them. I hope that's the other thing this does, is it maybe introduces you to some creative people. I'm very lucky that I've had an outlet thanks to Doctor Who, but Doctor Who's inspired a lot of creative people, far more creative than I am, and I hope to maybe bring some of them into your orbit, and that as a result of this, if nothing else, you discover them and get their podcasts or art or comedy or whatever it is that they do. Anyway, I seem to have gone on approximately forever, so let's wind up there. Thanks very much. Keep supporting these things if you can, and to you and yours, the very happiest of times and places.
I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find. I think you'll find.
Oh, I was close with the names of those rebel extras in the book. It's Mark, Joab, and Zando. Mark, Joab, and Zando. I was nearly there.
If you'd like to hear a little bit more from me, but you are too old to enrol on the A-level law course at the FE college that I teach at, but you are a fan of trivia that's liberally punctuated with bad language, then you can tune into my occasional podcast, Chris Boyle Didn't Know That. You can find it on iTunes, Spotify, and I'm sure loads of other podcast providers as well. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Chris Boyle downplays his comedy in his intro to these episodes, which is typical of him, but also wrong. He's talented, very friendly, somewhat geeky, and very engaging, and I know you'd be tuned in to what he's saying, so please check him out. He's also got a lovely singing voice and is putting various videos out there on top of his podcasts. Since recording his biog for us, he has rebooted and relaunched his podcast, which now goes under the name Chris Boyle's Mild Life Crisis. Check it out, you'll have fun. Thank you so much for listening to Happy Times and Places with me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest, Chris Boyle. The music for Happy Times and Places was specially composed by Dave Gates. Please go to www.tobyhadoke.com for more, and don't forget to rate, thumbs up, and generally be nice about this podcast everywhere that you possibly can. Next time on Happy Times and Places, pack a potato, we're going to Trafalgar Square. It's the Sontaran experiment. You can support these podcasts and any other of my broadcasting endeavours at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke and ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke. Patrons get special goodies and advance releases and my eternal gratitude. Doctor Who is BBC copyright, and no attempt has been made to infringe that copyright. Don't forget to subscribe to the official Toby Hadoke YouTube channel.